Hi everyone. I hope my microphone's working okay. I had some trouble this morning, typically the day of a conference, but I believe it should be all good now.
You've got a little echo, Chris. You've got a little echo.
Oh, that's an interesting problem. Is that any better?
Slightly, I think.
Okay. We'll try that way. So, hi everyone. I'm Chris Phillips. I'm here to talk about API governance, really. And when I say API governance in an anti-governance world, let me first tell you about my background. I work for IBM. I'm guessing you've all heard of IBM. We make software, do other stuff, mainly for large enterprises. But I'm considered an API guru by most of the sales team I work with, and I spend a lot of time reviewing customers' API strategies, and most importantly, with my day job as a cloud integration architect for the SWAT team, I go in and work out what's going wrong with their strategy. Are they using the product wrong? Does the product not work? Are they doing things inefficiently? And I spent probably the last 4 years doing this in earnest, but I've been doing this since I joined the field originally 7 years ago, a couple of days ago. This is what I enjoy. I love going to customers and understanding how they run their business and what they do with their business. Then how can we optimize that with the bounds of what's best practices for APIs and things like that, plus throwing in the challenge of the different cultures around the world. I run a blog, which is generally my brain dump of what I'm thinking at that moment in time or recent challenges. And I've been looking at API governance for a few years, but in the last 6 months, I've had a lot more interest from people on it. So I've got 4 or 5 articles in governance on there at the moment, with a couple more coming. I'm on LinkedIn, and if you have any questions for me or want to tell me I'm talking rubbish after the conference, that's fine. Just come to LinkedIn and challenge me, and I'll happily have a debate. Love a good argument. Sorry, discussion. And also I'm on Twitter, but I rarely post to it other than to complain at delivery people recently. When I say this is some examples from the blog post I have. So I've got some stuff on pipelines for API with API Connect. I've got governance 1, 2. There's definitely 3 and 4 on the blog now. Some API flavors or design patterns, and also an example of how we built some stuff integrating IBM API Connect to WhatsApp for a chatbot. And when I say I go around the world, in the last 3-4 years, this is where I've been. So I'm based here in the UK, and I've been a little bit busy, and the last year's been a bit slow because I haven't been out the country now for nearly 12 months. And so when I say I go out and I engage with customers here, I go out and I try and absorb the culture of the development teams. So, for example, I can tell you the attitude towards governance and APIs and processes in Italy is completely different to Colombia, which is completely different to South Africa, which is completely different to London, which is completely different to Jakarta. And I know all that firsthand from my experiences there, not just from reading about it, because of the challenges they've gone through and the way they've tried to adapt and solve them. And this is one of the best things from my job is I can take this factor, and all the recommendations and best practices I come up with and put on my blog or talk with it, like sessions like today, come from those experiences. So first of all, I need to have my obligatory marketing slide, which I'm sure sales will tell me off for saying. I am primarily responsible in the IBM SWAT team for a product called Cloud Pak for Integration. IBM Cloud Pak for Integration is our integration platform product. Inside of the integration platform product, we have our API management solution, which allows you to quickly, robustly build APIs and expose them to a central gateway. We have our application integration layer, which is built on the foundation that was IIB or IBM Integration Bus or WMB or MQSI, if you go back in the day, to provide you the best tools to link and connect your systems together inside your businesses or to stuff outside of your business. We provide end-to-end security throughout, so there's no excuse for not having SSL. There's encryption all the way through. We have enterprise-level messaging, so we have IBM MQ in here, which is the de facto standard for messaging. And we have our event stream Kafka offering as well. And finally, we have Aspira, which is the de facto standard in the entertainment world for moving large files around. So when you go to watch your movies on the big streams, the chances are Aspira is what's moved the files between the providers, the content producers, and the publishers. And all these run as one platform on top of Red Hat OpenShift, Red Hat, an IBM company. And we provide the ability of all the benefits of Kubernetes and OpenShift with the power and the quality you expect from our products on top. So my 1-minute marketing slide. So I wanted to come here and talk about governance because everyone says they know what governance is. Everyone says that governance is important, but we can't do it, or it is important and we are doing it. But everyone's definition seems to be slightly different. And what I want to talk about is how do we ensure we get the quality of governance and quality of control that we require for our deliveries and our commitment, and get things out the door as quickly as possible, but still providing that same level of control that governance provides. And so whenever I go to a client, normally when we break for a coffee, I grab, say, a senior developer and a junior developer together, and they teach me how the coffee machine works. And then I ask them the question, what's governance mean for you guys? How do you do it? How do you do enforcement? And the junior developer always says, governance is important. Doesn't know what governance is, but he knows it's important. And the second thing is, governance helps us provide control over what we're doing. And, well, yes, but it's a little bit more than that. Finally, we dig into it. Governance enforces consistency. And this is key for me. Consistency is one of the hardest things to correct once it's gone wrong. And consistency means that things are easier to enhance and find and use and group. Also, we get governance does not provide us any value, but it does reduce unplanned expense. And I love this phrase, and I think it was South Africa I got this phrase from, is whenever they were justifying putting the extra work in for governance, they could never point to a line item and say, this provided that value. But they could always say, well, if we didn't, or we could always say, point to a number of things after and say, well, because we didn't do governance very well at the start, these things went over budget. And it's a very interesting way of looking at this, because the challenge we always have with customers and people who want to apply governance is it's hard for them from a business bottom line position to say, this provides value. Because I would argue the value it provides is by condensing and reducing the contingency cost of the other things going forward, and reducing the amount of time you have to re-engineer. Just if anyone has any questions, guys, just jump in straight away into the chat. It's no problem at all. And finally, governance makes development take longer. This is one of the most common answers I get from project managers, and I remember discussing this with the guys in Italy. They were just saying, we have to jump through all these extra hoops, but why? It just means we take an extra 2 weeks to deliver our software, and our developers get more irate and frustrated and increase the pressure. And the answer is, well, you're probably doing governance wrong then. If you see governance just as making your development take longer, you're doing it wrong. You need to take a step back and work out, why are you doing these tasks? And it's quite often that you may not understand the benefit of the task you're doing, but if that's the case, we should go back and challenge it. And so what I try and make people think about is, what does it actually provide? First of all, it allows APIs to be more easily discovered. This is one of the KPIs for every API platform here, is being able to find and show off your wares, show off your APIs. And if we ensure a good governance process, we can make sure they're all exposed in a similar way, with a similar naming standard, a similar control, a similar set of requirements, so that they all look like a cohesive package and a cohesive platform, and they are working together. If we have one API that's structured one way and one API that's structured in a completely different way, then it's harder for people to twig, how do these things interact? And this builds onto, it allows APIs to become more easy to consume as well. Because only having your API to be discovered, in my opinion, is the most important job. Having your API easy to consume is second. And the only reason an API consumption is second to discovery is you have to do discovery first. Now, of course, some people will say you can just send the link, but the consumption here needs to be focused as well. And if we aren't making APIs easy to consume, you're making a massive challenge to your team that needs to consume them. And as we all know, if you make something particularly hard, developers will leave you. People will stop consuming your system if you don't focus on making things easy to consume. And consistency between your APIs is critical to this. It's easier to manage larger estates of APIs. So I have a customer who I was working with who came up to me saying, we have 6,500 APIs. 6,500 in production. We've had no governance process ever. We don't know who owns these APIs. We don't know which APIs work together. We barely know which APIs are being used. How do we take this collection and try and govern it, control it? Yes, Michael, that is a feasible. This is not just external facing APIs. This was internal facing APIs as well. And I'm sure there was a degree of poetic license in the numbers they gave me, but we're still talking thousands. And then you just sit here going, you have 6,000 APIs. You don't know which ones do what. You have no standardized naming conventions. You have no control on this. How do we take this and try and put some degree of order? You have no principles. You can take that whichever way you like, and you're not following these principles, following any principles, because there aren't any. And the developers have just been told, build this as quickly as possible. Principle, well, not so much principle make API. Principle, get functionality delivered. Exactly. No one can find. So Andrew Schmidt has put it perfectly here. Team X wants a new team wants X. No one says, have we already got something? They just build a new one. And they expected, I think they said they were expected to be able to reduce it by 80% is what they guessed. I have no idea what they managed to reduce it to because of this reuse concept that, yeah, it's not going to be your small organizations that go through this, but it's definitely a challenge, especially around mature organizations, especially ones that were in APIs from day one, who were trying to go through, deliver quickly, fix later. But if it didn't break, they didn't fix it. Catching accidental, embarrassing mistakes. Now, I love this. I have a brilliant example, and I'm going to be very careful how I give this example out. I think it was in East Asia. I was in one of the countries out there, and it was a non-English speaking. No, it was South America, and it was a non-English speaking team. And the problem they had is they recently published a new API. And the new API was part of the financial team. It's for the financial services team. And it was for updating customer details. And so they abbreviated the name of the API in the path. So it was host/path/platform name/F for financial, U for user, U for update, C for customer. And they discovered that they have actually gone out with an inappropriate word, shall we say, in the path. And this had been live for a few weeks, and they had, let's say, 2 or 3 people using it. And because of their own principles, they could not go and change this very easily because it was not a backwards compatible change they could make. There was no logical change to their backend system. That didn't have to change because it was not to the processing. It's just to how they expose it. And I've only seen this myself once, but I've seen horror stories around this probably half a dozen times because I like a beer with the developers in the evening. And you just sort of sit here going, wow, I can't believe that ever happened. And then someone else goes, yeah, that happened to us as well. And it happened to us. And I mean, the story I can give you from my own time in development is one for a beer conversation. But these things happen. And the impact of changing them means you're going to impact your consumers, which is almost the biggest no-no there can be. And we have reduced the chances APIs are published before they are finished. How many times has someone published an API having forgot to do documentation, forgot to do descriptions, forgot to do examples, forgot to test it? Let's be simple here. You just pushed it out, rushed it out. How many times do you have incomplete paths or the wrong verbs enabled? Or my favorite one, which I came across, someone went live with the wrong security profile. They were supposed to use OAuth that went out with API key. I can't remember. I think they caught that one within minutes, so that wasn't a problem. But we all rushed and pushed to deliver stuff faster and faster and faster. And we can let things slip through that we just aren't part of the interesting part of building APIs. The specification design interests me. The implementation of the logic we do around the API interests me. Ensuring I have examples for every single path should interest me as a governance guy because I tell people off for not doing it. But I do struggle to make it get in there as well. And what we need to do is catch these things before they go live. Catch these as early and as possible in the development lifecycle of APIs to ensure that we catch everything. And firstly, clear ownership. When it goes wrong, who's responsible for fixing it? It sounds obvious, but every single customer I go to, has a different model for how they do operations and support. Sometimes business lines own them in production. Sometimes the environment team owns them in production. Sometimes they don't know and just hope it doesn't go wrong. Again, be a conversation for another day. But yeah, so that's what governance is. And I wanted just to put a background here of why I'm passionate about this, why this interests me, and the challenges we've had over the last few years talking to people and what they're trying to do. So when I come in and they ask me to help talk about governance rules, I almost throw out what they've got in some ways and just sort of say, what are the biggest risks that are lowest cost to entry? And I'm going to put some sample rules here. Now, these rules are by no means complete or exhaustive. The rules here are just where I would start, and I would build out from these. If I had time, I'll put 200 rules up here probably. So first, and these are generally created by architects or technical leads. And it's clear is you need the guys with experience putting these in, ideally not the people writing the code, not because the people who write code aren't experienced, but they are generally the ones who don't think about the coding aspect rather than the impact. And the first one is, does the API specification contain any inappropriate words? Simple, humorous, we're all laughing a little bit, breaks the tension. Does the API have descriptions set? Fairly obvious. We need descriptions to help advertise and socialize, or sharify as this week's word seems to be, to show you what the API does. Does it have examples? With examples, we can implement them a lot more easily. Are we using camel case consistently? Personal bugbear, where we have some APIs in camel case, some APIs in snake case, just mixes and matches, and it's a personal dislike. Are we using the correct HTTP defined codes? 200, 201, 400, 418, 500. I hope everyone on the session here today knows what a 418 is. If not, go and have a look. Is the correct security configuration defined? Are we supposed to be using OAuth? Do we have security defined at all? It's easy to slip through. Are the naming standards being followed? Is the owner team listed in the specification? And we take all of these and we will put together a configuration and put it into a linting tool. And the purpose of this linting tool is you will run this linting tool when code is checked in or code is built, depending on your DevOps process. And you can feed back directly to developer, are these being met? Without require a human coming in to go and do that validation. So a linting tool, for those of you who are not aware, is originally came in to analyze contents of file to ensure it meets preset rules. It started as a syntactical validator. That's where I first learned linting tools back at university. It was a syntactical validator. Then we built them to now validate open API specifications. There's many out there that do that. And now we're starting to see custom rule implementations as well. I would always recommend we treat them like a unit test. Whenever we modify a spec or create a spec, we should always run these linting tools with your configuration over all of your file, over all of the files that have changed before we accept them. My linting tool of choice is obviously the IBM one. I'm IBM. Go and have a look at this, Luke. Yes, Link, it does support custom validation. I've had to hack some of the things a little bit to get some of the more advanced use cases in there, but it's open source. Go and have a play. We don't charge you for it. So we'll take these rules and we'll put them into a JSON config file. Now, this is a short session, so I'm not going to jump into all the guts here. But in a sense, we build some JSON, I think they're called spectral definitions based on these requirements. Some of these are also available straight from the Open API validator, such as descriptions, examples, and I believe camel case. So we can ensure that everything there is done. And then we can say, is this error a warning or an error? Does it stop the build or does it just alert you? Someone looked at 418. So we take that config goes into the linting tool. So how do we build this into your system and into your environment in such a way that it's going to take minimal impact to your developers? Well, first of all, we take the config and we put it into your Git repo or your whatever source control system you use. And if you say you don't use a source control system, we are going to have a very long conversation afterwards. But you have a source control system. You put this into its own repo. If anyone wants to add additional rules, they go through the same code delivery process as you do for the rest of your things into Git. The rules can be put straight into there. And then when someone either wants you do a pull request, or when you're doing a build or a deploy, whichever build event system you want to follow on, a build event is triggered. You go into the build coordinator, which let's say it's Jenkins or whatever. You then kick off the process start. You install the latest version of the linting tool. And this is something that I've always put my foot down on, is you always work with the latest version of the linting tool as much as possible. Yes, you have to do work to keep it in sync, but the evergreening costs are so much easier that you can, if you do it all the time. If you leave your linting tool massively out of date, then you will probably discover that it gets killed off rather than the work going into to improve it, because people won't see the value. The linting tool will come in and it will check out the governance repo, or the governance configuration for the linting tool, the JSON config file. And then it will check out your APIs. It will validate your APIs, and then it will report the user back. And this, for those of you who haven't realized, which I'll be very surprised if this is any of you, this is how a JUnit test, not JUnit, basic integration tests work as well. Your first level simple tests work. You build something into the system, you do your quick set of tests to validate it before you merge your code in, and then you report back. And this is the same principle. The aim is to report back to the developer near instantaneously of the changes they've made or for any problems they have. So it's not caught 3 or 4 hours later or 4 or 5 weeks later when it goes to deploy or when it goes live. The other advantage of this system is if you are the technical architect here and you want to make a change or you want to add a governance rule, you can just take this config file, update it with your new rule, and then you can run it against all your existing APIs in a very similar process here. So you can quickly see then, what is the impact of this rule change? Is it going to be fine? Does it not impact anything? Does it break all your existing APIs? It will be a long, tedious process to update, or what? And so you can put extra check and understanding very quickly of what the impact of you changing your processes is. And we all joke and say, well, you very rarely change your governance processes. We all know that's not true. We all know they change twice as often as they should. And every time they change, it is massively painful for everything that already exists. And it's really hard to get teams to agree, oh, you need to go and investigate which of these APIs are broken because we've changed our naming standards. And retrospectively changing naming standards is not something that I recommend, but something that I have seen more than 1 or 2 occasions. And every time they've changed, they changed with good reasons, generally because the technology or the business had changed. So the benefits of this is it enforces consistency with minimal human engagement. It is an automated as-a-code system to provide feedback to your developers directly as soon as they commit their code to catch the simple mistakes that could be really painful once they go live. We have immediate application of rules. So as I said, they can quickly see it. We can validate impact of new rules. So if say changes are coming in, we can see what the impact of the changes is going to be, how many people are impacted. And the key aim here is there should be near zero, I say no additional, let's be fair, near zero additional effort for the developers who are writing the specifications, because developers are already pushed to function as quickly as they can. We should not be adding additional long consuming tests or challenges for them in there. We should be ensuring that they are shaped and pushed down the correct path with the tools available to us. So it's 25 past. That's all I have for today. I appreciate this was very quick, but it's only a short session I had. I've got 5 minutes for any questions. If anyone would like to ask any.
Thanks, Chris. That was really good. So I really appreciate the Postman conference for one reason, right? Because we have sort of somewhat competing products, but we're sort of approaching or trying to solve for the same problem, right? And your storytelling was really, really great. I was curious about, so you sort of create these rules and then you can kind of lint the work that actually needs to be done, right? To be conform to those rules. What do you tell the teams who are just sort of like implementing this governance strategy? Like how often should they review their strategy? How much should they come together, right? Because that's a big lift too, not only just creating the rules and enforcing them and enforcing like the daily work, but getting the company to change the culture so that there is that governance structure in place, and then keeping that, the sort of top level updated and consistently reviewing what's going on. And as you said, right, it's a painful process, but I'm just curious how you approach that conversation to get the culture to change.
So I've been presenting on this topic for a few months now, and that is still the single hardest question that anyone's asked me, and you're the second person to ask me. And the answer is simply because it depends very much on the organization you're working with. Some large organizations actually have a process to review some of their governance 6 monthly or yearly. And it depends on the target, your delivery, all that jazz of what is right. There is not some magical answer. If you tell me you've gone 12 months without reviewing it, I would raise an eyebrow. If you told me you reviewed it every week, I would be shocked. The answer really comes down to how often does the direction you're working around change? And I would say reviewing it every quarter and allowing for implementation changes every 6 months would be my line in the sand. But I would not be precious to that. But if you want to change it less often than yearly and more often than weekly, then I would be disheartened.
Yep. My other question, and then we can get to Andrew's. Yep. Was there any nuggets that you gave to the company that had 6,000 APIs?
I think good luck was the starting one.
Yeah. Okay.
They went, yeah,
nice.
we know our challenges. The nuggets I gave to them was, you're not going to solve this, full stop. But what you are going to be able to do, and I say not going to solve this, you're not going to solve this in any quick amount of time. You've got to start putting some rules in place and get the linting in place to understand where the biggest problems are. What are the biggest bangs for the buck? You aren't going to be able to do things like interface changes or path changes, really, because you've got that many consumers. Because they have 6,500 APIs, they probably have like 50,000 consumers. I'm possibly exaggerating here, but they have 6,500 consumers. That's not susceptible to change. What you need to recommend is you start with the things that aren't going to impact them directly, the passive things, descriptions, examples. Then start looking at, is there a set of users that just use one set of API, and break it down into chunk by chunk fashion, so you're only impact a set of people one at a time. And also, you're probably going to have to end up running multiple APIs in parallel while you do this migration over. But that's a whole different beast to tackle. And or are you just going to, another customer I was at didn't know how many consumers they had of their services. This is back in the service days before APIs. I know not to use, and their challenge was they didn't know who was using their system. They didn't even know if their system was critical to the business, and so they had a multi-million-dollar project just to work out who was using their system. Just to be clear, I've been to 40 of clients in the last 2 years. So if you guess correctly who these are, I'm in trouble. But I'm being vague enough here that you should know. And not all my clients are bad. Most of them are good. But there are some horror stories, and that's why my job exists. And so it comes down to where you want the problem to be. Providing you know who your consumers are, which in the 6,000 API case, they were good with that. And they could work out, they started off by first removing the ones that were deadwood that no one was using. And that's what then they were going to look at, doing the descriptions and things like that. And then analyzing everything else to work out what's the chunk do we do these in. And it was a multi-year process for that many APIs.
Yep. Cool. You can get to Andrew's question.
Sure. Andrew Schmidt said, is there a preferred way you have seen to integrate these linters to facilitate easy adoption by the development teams? Andrew, great question. And now I'm going to sit here and put a confession out. I have yet to see more than one client implement this as part of their build process. I have probably seen every client I've shown this to wants to, but this has really come about in the last 6 months. And I'm not going to say there's one magical way of doing this. I would say take your existing test infrastructure strategy and apply this to it, because you don't want another set of standards to follow. You want to follow your existing standards. And all this at the end of the day is just another application running test tools over. So is that going to be forced on the laptop, like you're running Mocha on your laptop before you commit your code? Yes, it could be. Could it be in a VM you spin it specially? Yes, it could be. Do what fits the pattern that your organization has. Like everything else, there's only wrong answers. There's never right answers for this stuff. In same with all automated testing. There's always challenges, however you cut the pie. Andrew, does that answer your question?
And I'm going to have to drop because I've got another call that's starting right now. Chris, I think you can stay on if you want to.
Yep.
I'll remind everybody in Slido, there's a survey for the session. And then I think this session actually closes in 5 minutes. So wrap up any conversations in the next 5 minutes. I will see everybody at the next session and enjoy the rest of the time at Galaxy. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Cheers, Andrew. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
To Andrew. Bye. So that's good, Andrew. And congratulations if you moved a CLI into a pipeline. It sounds easier than it is the way I've seen people describe it whenever they try to do it at scale. So if there's no more questions, guys, I mean, I've got 3 more minutes. I'm happy to jump out, happy to take stuff via LinkedIn. If you disagree with what I've said, please let me know. I'd love to have a debate on this stuff. This is a lot of my beer conversations recently. I have 2 in Slido. Oh, 2 questions. Go for it. Jared, go. That's a $50 million question. Jared, there is no right or wrong here. I would say if you are having to refactor to ensure your APIs meet the standard, you need to understand firstly, what is the consequences of the refactoring? If the consequence of the factoring is you're going to impact your end consumers, then that has to be a very serious conversation to have. There is no magical, let's just do it and see if they cope. No, you need to look at the impact to your consumers. If there's no impact to consumers, then you question the value of the API, I would say. Or if you're changing the signature and it's not impacting consumers, go ahead. But look at how the impact and how the consumers will respond. Secondly, what if we are using a linter, but we are still having some of the same problems? What sort of problems exactly are you thinking of? And while you respond to that, let me respond to Emmanuel. All my previous presentations on this topic have been to closed customers. So this is my first public presentation on this topic. I have done a few other sessions on other topics. I think there are links on my blog. If not, I will put some links on my blog. So, Jared, what is the actual problem you're trying to solve here? And if we run out of time and get disconnected, please message me on LinkedIn and we'll continue this. In terms of inconsistency, how we use APIs, some are XML RPC, some are microservices, some are regular services. So whether it's microservices, regular services, or quite frankly, GraphQL, don't care, providing what we're exposing is consistent across the areas it needs to. Any tips on how to... So let me finish with Jared first, and then Emmanuel, I'll come on to you. The key thing here is understand the impact. So first of all, draw a line. I mean, anything new must follow this format. And then you look at your most used and least used APIs from consumer side and start working out, is it worth the investment? Will you be bringing a new version of that API out in the next 3 to 4 months? Or are you planning never to change that API again? If you're planning to bring a new version out anyway, because you've added additional features, then merge the work in with that. If you're not planning to make that change, then you've got to sit there and make the hard decision. Is it worth the investment to keep things consistent? Now, if this is your single most important API that your entire business is based off, then the answer will be yes, it's probably worth the investment, but it's a lot of risk at the same time. And it all comes down to the risk reward that we always have to make is when do we make changes? So, for example, if you had the scenario where you accidentally had a swear word in the path, for example, you might say that's a high priority to get it out there and migrate all your consumers off it as swiftly as possible. Or you might say, just bite the bullet, go, we've done it. Let's accept this fact and move on and just fix it at the next opportunity. It all comes down to what your attitude to risk is. Now, Emmanuel, any advice on how to present on this topic for future collaboration? My advice always is draw from your own experience, draw from what you've seen go right and go wrong, both around you and what you've read about. Experience is really what drives how this works, because as I said at the start, governance doesn't help increase value. Governance reduces contingency costs. And so the experience of where things are going wrong and concerns are always the critical thing to pull on. So, Jared, have I dodged your question well enough? There is not a magical answer, I'm afraid. It is take it down and review it step by step. But the linting tool will help you understand your problems and the degree of problems that you have. So, guys, I think this is going to cut me off at any second now. So thank you very much. I assume it already has cut me off because the chat has stopped. So please reach out to me with any questions. I will happily discuss anything afterwards. Thank you. Have a great day.